I'm Professor Stephen Dyson,
And I'm Professor Jeff Dudas.
and we are two political science professors who have just watched episode 5 of Pluribus, and we are here to give our instant reaction, our breakdown, our recap of the episode, and try and isolate its major sort of themes and ideas. I thought this was another subtle and entertaining episode, Jeff, that sort of pushes on some of the main themes of the story. What was your take?
Yeah, I thought this was a really good episode. There's a lot to talk about here. I think the first thing that I want to acknowledge is the sort of bravura acting performance this week by Rhea Seehorn.
Remarkable.
Almost the entire episode is simply her.
Yes.
And her performance in the entire show has really been extraordinary, but I thought this week was really something special. So that's the first thing I would acknowledge just from a kind of a production standpoint. I also thought that these two episodes, episode 4 last week and episode 5 this week, are very much a paired set of concerns. And I also think that we get some real shifting in the characteristic of the Pluribus and of what we know about the Pluribus and what it seems to be capable of, or what seem to be the major kinds of personality characteristics, so to speak, that it offers. All in all, I thought this was a strong episode. It continues to be, I think, a really interesting show. And I think it's, as the episodes go on, it's revealing deeper and deeper layers. What did you think of it?
Yeah, I really liked the episode, and I thought Rhea Seehorn was, really compelling. And she has a very difficult job. She's the center of the show. Her character is sort of this utterly unlikable person, and I think you have a theory you want to go into that she might actually be the most unlikable person literally sort of in the world. And yet you got to sort of watch her, and you've got to want to watch her. And I thought the kind of shining most shining part of what is a great performance in the show and what was particularly great in this episode was the kind of direct to camera stuff she was doing when she becomes, Jeff, one of those crazy people who sets a camera up in a room, kind of records their thoughts and then tries to push it out in the world. And as everyone knows, those people are absolutely mental. Who would do that?
Very bad stories about those kind of people.
Yeah, really, real weirdos. And she kind of does this, and she sort of, pretties herself up and sets up the lighting in the room and all the rest of it. And you see her trying to adopt this pose as sort of leader of the survivors, my 12 fellow survivors, and they kind of shoot her in the way they might shoot a politician giving a great speech, and she's trying to reach for these, I don't know, Churchillian tones, and she's just the least compelling leadership figure you could possibly imagine. And it's just brilliant how Rhea Seehorn is conveying what's going on in Carol's head, and Carol thinks she's discovered these sort of vital things, and yet when you articulate them, and you can sort of see it play over her face when she articulates them, they're really a lot of like nothing, or they're not very it has this texture that's like olive oil but thinner, and that's got to mean something. And it's just a bravura performance.
It really is. And it's also a callback to, I think it was episode 2, where the characters, the survivors, so to speak, are on Air Force One. And there's the scene in which she sort of kicks out the Pluribus and she postures herself at the top of the table, clearly meant to evoke this, position of leadership and authority. Her fellow survivors are completely and totally unpersuaded by her affect. And it's the same sort of thing that we see here on camera. In some ways, it's even more pathetic on camera because she actually has the ability, one would think, to write out what she wants to say. She's got a bunch of props.
Well, you see, she does that.
She does.
She's a great sort of wordsmith, and she's like, what are they? Afflicted people? Sure, they're afflicted people, which is sort of thematically important because she is trying to make the case to her fellow survivors that she knows how, or she potentially knows, she actually doesn't know. She says, I've discovered that there is a way to turn back what's happened. And of course, the next line is, and this is how you do it. I've discovered there is a way. I don't know what it is yet because they wouldn't tell me. But they almost did, and so this can definitely happen. And she keeps saying, we can restore the world to what it was, and we can sort of save these people. And even as she's saying it, you're seeing she's not able to articulate what it is they need to be saved from,
or why the world should actually be restored. Because we know that at least in part, some of the survivors, if not almost all of them, actually seem to quite prefer the new world. and don't want to go back.
Well, and Carol herself thought the world was crap before before the virus, right? She suddenly has this great nostalgia for how things were, but she thought a lot of it was rubbish to begin with. She wasn't able to kind of take part in it in any sort of joyful way. The Pluribus, as the episode begins, have become, I use the word suspicious. You think there's a better word for that, but they're definitely angry with Carol, and they definitely want to get away from her.
So this is one of the through lines, I think, between episode 4 and episode 5. And of course, episode 5 picks up almost immediately after the end of episode 4 in a narrative sense. And what's happening, it seems to me, at the beginning of episode 5, as Carol is engaging in a far more distant way with the Pluribus members who are in the hospital, is telegraphed or prefaced by the end of episode 4, when the Pluribus realizes what Carol has done to Zosia. And I don't think it's necessarily a look of anger or surprise or fear. I think they're disgusted with her. It's a look of disgust. They won't engage with her in a meaningful way. They are no longer anywhere near as solicitous. They're no longer as welcoming or as generous. Their speech with her lacks the affect of kindness and generosity that it has up until this point. They are clearly, it seems to me, disgusted with her, and they have changed their mind about her. Now, later we will see, after they literally abandon her and evacuate, as you talked about earlier off camera, evacuated the scene in the way that one would evacuate the scene of a nuclear accident, for example.
Right.
They create this recording that says, we will contact you. We will be in contact with you now at your behest, not at ours, but at your behest, and you will leave a message, and then we will try to satisfy you.
Yeah. This is a recording. Our feelings for you have not changed.
But that's the key,
yes.
Right? Our feelings for you have not changed. Now, Carol has decided in the previous episode that the Pluribus cannot lie, but that is obviously a lie. Their feelings very much have changed for her. They have moved into this register of disgust and a very intentional goal of separating themselves from her and not being around her. And so they are lying to her. Now, she doesn't realize it, but that strikes me as something that is maybe hanging in the narrative background here, but seems quite important for how we understand who the Pluribus is and what their basic personality characteristics
Well,
are.
there's a great line Carol uses when she's doing her YouTuber influence video, when she's explaining what happens, and she's like, after I did what I did with Zosia, or took my actions to try and discover what's going on, I caused the whole world started crying, and the city where I am was entirely evacuated, which tells me I'm on the right track. Which is a sort of great sort of double meaning. Only Carol would think making literally the entire world cry and causing a nuclear blast radius of destruction and evacuation would show I'm doing something right.
Her take there is the narcissist's take, and this gets into what I think is for me, the macro theme of these two episodes taken together. That part of what's happening, and actually for me, I guess most of what's happening in these two episodes thematically, is that we are getting a real exploration of Carol's narcissism and of the damage that it causes to everyone and everything around her. So Carol sees the rest of the world as playthings. They are objects for her desire. Everyone else around her is an appendage of her own desires, wants, and needs. This is how she's treated everyone who's ever been around her, including Helen. And it is how she imagines, right, the disgust that she has with her fan base in the Wycaro stories. She imagines them as simply objects, as things to be maneuvered around, people to be exploited, people whose money creates a privileged life for her, but not people to be taken seriously or empathized with. It is meaningful to me, it seems like, from the previous episode, when she's having the conversation about her books as compared to Shakespeare's books, and she's having that conversation with the Pluribus member, and she says, you can't possibly believe, something to the effect of, you can't possibly believe that my mid-level, mid-tier schlock is of the highest level, and certainly not in the same register as, Shakespeare's sort of benighted figure in world literature. And the Pluribus member tells her the story of like her superfan. And she says, your stories literally saved this woman's life. She was going to commit suicide, but your work, your art, made a difference outside of yourself. And for a half second, that story appears to penetrate Carol's narcissism, but then it's gone entirely. She has no capacity for empathy in the same way that the classic narcissist personality has no capacity for empathy. And so, of course, her conclusion from creating a situation in which her mood swings, her desires, her posture in the world, which puts everyone around her constantly on eggshells, hoping to not upset her, because when they do upset her, she is a danger, right, to anyone in her blast radius. That kind of classic enmeshed appendage-like posture towards the world is, it seems to me, what these episodes are telling us about Carol. This is who she is. She is one of, if not the worst person literally in the world. Perhaps that's why she has not been affected by a virus even as extraordinary as potentially an extraterrestrial virus. Who's one of the only people that it cannot penetrate? Who's one of the only people that it cannot encourage to be empathetic in the way that the Pluribus, which has been evacuated of all negative emotions? The one person who cannot, right, the one trait that cannot be affected apparently by this mind virus is the toxic narcissism of one of the worst people, if not the worst person on the face of the earth. And so, of course, she's going to conclude, well, they all left me, which means I was right all along. Rather than, what am I doing that even a mind hive population that appears to be incapable of negative emotions and whose defining characteristic is empathy and generosity, what am I doing that even they can't be around me? Even they have to separate themselves from me so that I don't destroy them. I think in a certain way, the show, these last two episodes, have become this kind of extraordinary mediation on toxic narcissism and the exceedingly dysfunctional role that it plays in a collective.
Yeah, it's a very plausible reading, and it would lead you to wonder how much of this is happening kind of solely from, not only from Carol's perspective as a protagonist, but actually just solely in her head. And we did talk kind of beforehand that we've alighted upon. I'm not sure if we think this theory or this ending for the show is true, or if it just should be true. But there is we kind of, let's just put the theory out there, and we'll see what happens. But the
commenters can tell us how crazy we are.
Yeah, exactly. But you'd noticed a scene in the episode that you thought was a little kind of. It didn't look real. It didn't look in accord with the rest of the way the show's being shot. And sometimes that can happen just because. Sometimes it could be just it strikes you as not real and no one else. Sometimes it can happen because like they didn't quite get it right in the production process or whatever. Or sometimes it can happen, especially in a very high level show, because you're deliberately being. It's like a little Easter egg or a little clue that something's going on that's sort of hyper real or happening from a different perspective. Do you want to talk through just what it was that set you off on this train of thought?
So the scene that I noticed was at the very beginning of this week's episode when Carol wakes up in the hospital and everyone has left and everyone has abandoned her. And in fact, they've left Albuquerque entirely. And she climbs up to the roof of the hospital to kind of see what's happening. We see the cars and the trucks leaving, and we see the town being abandoned, the city being abandoned. But the first thing we see is Carol's face, a close-up of Carol's face. And we watched it again before we went on camera, and it seems to me, and I think you agree, that very clearly seems to be a green screened shot.
She doesn't naturally sit within that shot. No. Like there's sort of an outline around her, and it's
totally out of place with every other visual moment in the show so far.
Yeah.
And it's out of place with the showrunner's own proclamation that got a lot of press at the beginning of the series that they had not worked with AI or any of these kinds of, replacement-like technologies, that this was a naturally filmed show.
Yeah.
And it just immediately was this kind of glaring out of place-ness with that scene. And it got me to wondering if it was a mistake, if it was shoddy work. And I think, as you say, I don't think we should see it as shoddy work. I mean, that wouldn't make any sense with the rest of the show and how carefully it is plotted and how masterfully the different scenes are organized and the way that the threads are pulled together so tightly. To have a green screen presentation at the very beginning of this episode seems meaningful, or potentially meaningful in a creative way.
Yeah, so one possibility could be that that we're being offered clues one way or another, either through the, as you say, the sort of thematically, this episode can easily be read as orchestrated around Carol's intense narcissism, seeing the world entirely from your perspective, and the only thing that's kind of real is your own perception of yourself, and everyone else is sort of you're not seeing them as they really are, the kind of projections of your own kind of needs and drives and desires. And maybe we're being shown that sort of filmically as well. And that could suggest that this is, even within the sort of universe or reality, the fictional reality of the show, this is not actually happening, right? That this is all really happening inside some form, inside Carol's head, and she's in some sort of like dream state, or like, I think you suggested, kind of a drunken blackout state. Or I had the theory that I wonder if actually what we're seeing is the plot of Carol's serious book, Carol's serious novel. And maybe what Pluribus is, in this story of the alien virus and the changing society, is that's what Carol has imagined, as her kind of masterwork. And I did say that, like, the best possible end to this show would be, you realize that this is the case, and it cuts to a still alive Helen reading the manuscript and she of Carol's serious novel, which is actually the story of Pluribus. And she closes the last page and she looks up at Carol, who looks at her expectantly. What do you think? And Helen says, "I'm leaving."
I'm leaving because the whole thing has been this extraordinary mediation on, or exploration of, a toxic narcissist.
I see you for who you really are.
Exactly.
Your true colors have shown themselves.
Well, we'll see. I think that would be an amazing end to this show. It would be controversial for sure. One thing I think, though, that is not controversial thematically about this show, is something we both picked up on, is that towards the second half of this episode, we get a shift in genre register, and it becomes a detective story.
Detective Carol,
who is now sort of lighting her way out into the world and discovering what she takes to be the backstory of the virus, and she hopes to be the unraveling, right, or what she calls the unjoining, of what has happened. And we're clued in to this narrative genre shift because we see, presumably on, I guess it would be on Helen's side of the bed, we see that she's been reading Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None.
Yep, which is the best-selling detective novel in the history of the genre, apparently. I mean, according to Wikipedia. And we would actually appreciate some, hive mind crowdsourcing on what you see as the significance of that. Is it just that it's the best-selling detective story, and so it's putting you in the Detective Carol space, or is there something in the plot? I mean, I only got the plot summary from Wikipedia. It's based on kind of Agatha Christie wanted to write a story that was inspired by lines of verse, and she said it was a very challenging novel to write because you had to have a lot of things going on without them becoming implausible. I don't know what the significance is of the specific plot, but it's definitely you're definitely in detective story realms, She kind of is tooling around as a lone police person in the in the police cruiser, kind of going into abandoned places, warehouses, shining a torch, uncovering clues, doing the kind of detective thing. She goes back to Sprouts, which as we learned from the
real place.
from the hive mind is a real place, just not in Connecticut. And she, because she's found a barcode. It's basically the Great Milk Conspiracy, right? She figures out the Pluribus are only drinking milk, and she kind of realizes it's not milk, but it's this kind of substance that she, sort of understands but can't really describe to her YouTube audience. I thought instantly, especially with the final scene of the episode where she's kind of shocked at what the secret ingredient is, I thought of the old kind of 70s dystopia Soylent Green, which posits a utopia, and all sort of hunger has been solved, and there are these different kind of food products associated with different colors, and the latest one is Soylent Green, and in the final scenes of the movie, it's discovered that Soylent Green is people. Soylent Green is people.
It'll be this kind of powdery, sugary type substance that's being carried around in bags. Maybe it's ground up people. That would be on brand,
right,
for what the program is doing. And
well, also if this is a projection of Carol, in a most, what are people? They're kind of disposable, consumable things, and they're just really bags of kind of non-specific matter to her.
And you use them for whatever your healing needs might be, right? So I thought back to, in the previous episode 4, Zoysia is drinking milk when she's in the hospital and recovering. And it's obviously not milk, it's whatever this substance is. It would make sense that that the hive mind regenerates themselves through the consumption of human remains.
Yeah, and if you take the story literally, like it's anti-cannibalism is a sort of, a social taboo. I mean, there are physiological reasons why it's not a good idea to consume your own species and so forth. But the strongest taboo is the social one. And if you strip human society of its existing taboos and all the rest of it, like maybe it just seems a very efficient use of resources from the standpoint of kind of aliens. But again, we don't think this is a literal story of alien manipulation, or it's doing symbolic work, even if it remains a literal story.
That's probably controversy amongst the viewers. I agree with you. I don't think that we're going to get a big reveal with aliens, but others do believe that we're learning yet. So we'll see.
What's going on with the dogs?
Okay, so this is really interesting. You brought this up off camera, right? That we've got this recurring set of scenes in this episode where there are wild dogs who, as you called back to accurately, we've been told, I think it was in episode 2, that all the dogs are off their leashes, all the animals are out of the zoos, and that they're kind of running wild. And it's the first time, I think, that we have seen this kind of animal life in Albuquerque, isn't it?
I think so.
We've heard allusions to it elsewhere.
Yeah, and we saw rats in the first episode in the lab thing, but out in the wild, I think so.
And so they are starting to essentially invade Carol's house in the first place because she hasn't been taking the garbage out. It's obvious that she doesn't know how to do that, right? That's clearly something that Helen did, right? And so they get into the garbage, and then she kind of gets rid of them, and then we get this whole sort of comic, farcical element with the drones coming and picking up her garbage, which, by the way, again, just lends credence to her narcissistic characteristics. In spite of claiming to have so much agency as from last week and being such an independent figure, she literally can't even go a half day without making demands on the Pluribus.
I need my garbage picked up.
Pick up my garbage. And then we get later a significantly more, I think, meaningful and terrifying scene in which a kind of a pack of dogs, or maybe they're coyotes, it's possible that they're wolves. I couldn't quite pick out, right, because it's nighttime, when they try to dig up Helen's body. There's a way that what I thought of, right, and also our Paraguayan
Manusas
Oviedo. What does he eat? Right, he's eating expired dog food.
Right.
So there's this kind of recurring figure of dogs. In Western mythology, dogs have conventionally played this kind of intermediary role between the living and the dead. They have been seen as these kinds of intermediary figures, portrayed as intermediary figures, almost gateways to the underworld, or gatekeepers to the underworld. And so that would make some sense here if if part of what's happening is that Gilligan is kind of playing around in this sort of mythological universe, dogs would be an appropriate thing to put, particularly in a context where they're trying to dig up a dead body. Right.
Well, and crucial, yes, I think there's a couple of crucial things. One is the thing that horrifies Carol the most is when the dogs try and dig up Helen's body.
Yeah.
And there is there is this kind of dual relationship, or this relationship she has with Helen, where on the one hand, Helen was the one person who kind of kept her tethered to the world and was mediated and all the rest of it. But Carol is so rejectionist of the world, that does Carol really miss Helen? She doesn't spend a lot of time grieving. It kind of comes up. But anyway, if you follow that line of logic through, does Carol not want Helen to be exhumed because that's horrifying, of course, and a desecration of her loved one's grave? That's the literal reading. The other thing is Helen is the one who knew Carol the best and kept her tethered to reality. Therefore, as Carol's narcissism spirals, Helen must not be exhumed. She must remain buried for Carol's kind of atomic level narcissistic detonation to kind of reach critical mass. So that's why she has to rebury Helen and pave her over, and it sort of works either way. Sorry.
Right. No, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, she's very careful about covering the entire plot and then she does create a headstone.
Yeah.
So I think it's maybe we're not to see this as entirely cynical, but it strikes. I do think it strikes the viewer as meaningful.
Yeah.
Right. In a way that I'm not sure we quite know if there's going to be further elements to this particular plot line. But there is something, I think you're quite right. There's something happening here with dogs and the figure of dogs that are recurring over and over again as somehow being unbound in this new world. And what does it mean when these kinds of figures who are mythological gatekeepers to the underworld, mythological mediators between the living and the dead, when they are unbound, what does that look like?
Right.
Does that contribute? How does that contribute thematically?
Right. Okay, so we've loved talking through this episode. We would, as always, really benefit from and value any comments you could leave us. Are we at all on the right track? Have we totally lost the plot on this episode? What did you make of it? What did you make of its thematics? Jeff, it's great to have you back after my kind of odd solo experience last week. And you were absolutely crucial to this one because Apple dropped it on an odd day, taking kind of Thanksgiving. And I had completely missed this. And you sort of texted me last night, like, we got to do a video.
And I wonder how many of our commenters also missed it.
Who knows? I mean, I guess we'll find out. But hopefully you're there. Hopefully you see this video and please do leave us a comment. And we will be back next week. But on that bombshell,